Hello and welcome. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching Business Today. A new IMF working paper has claimed that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's food security project was instrumental in preventing an increase in extreme poverty levels in India during the COVID-19 pandemic years. The paper is titled Pandemic, Poverty and Inequality Evidence from India and has been authored by Dr Surjit Bhalla, Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund for India, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Sri Lanka. It's also been written, co-authored by economist Karan, Bhasin and Dr Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor and Chairman of the eGrow Foundation. And joining me now on the show are Dr Bhalla and Dr Virmani. Welcome to the show to both of you. This is a paper that normally should receive a great deal of attention because, Dr. Bhalla, one of the key contentions here is that the low level of extreme poverty in 2 consecutive years, it remained below 1% and it can be considered as elimination of extreme poverty. Dr. Bhalla, some would say that you are making an extreme conclusion on the basis of what surely is a good study, but that it is an extreme conclusion to say that extreme poverty has been eliminated in India.
Well, let's just go by what you said and what the other people are disagreeing with, etc. It is, take the US, take China, other countries, when they reach below 1% of the extreme poverty, which is just 50 rupees per person per day. Okay? So when you have that, if you're less than 50 rupees, you're not considered poor. That doesn't mean you're not poor. That is the whole point of our paper, that one of several points of our paper, that India should move to a higher definition of poverty line. And what we contend that it is 50. If it is 50 rupees a day per person, that is only about 14% of the population today, or 18% of the population. And I think we should move to perhaps in a few years to even a higher poverty line, such that the bottom 33%, this is my view, and I think shared broadly by Arvind and Karan, that, poverty line is not, remember in the olden days, we talked about the absolute poverty line. Most countries, non-poor countries, have a poverty line, but it's no longer the absolute. It's a relative poverty line. And that poverty line is defined relative to the median income. And that's where we will get to after we graduate to 5.5, 3.2, and 5.5.
Okay, $3.2.
Let me put it.
Yes, go ahead, Dr. Virmani.
Let me put it in a context which may be familiar to Indians. When we used to compare India with Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Philippines, South Korea, that we were all at the same income in the 1960s. Well, they also went through this process. They just went through it 10, 20 years earlier. They also passed through this absolute poverty phase. And when their poverty level at that when low income went below 1%, their poverty was eliminated. So I don't see why it is so puzzling. The question is, one can question whether it's 1%. Somebody else may say 5% or whatever, or 10% now, but our assertion is that it's down to 1%. So we passed that absolute poverty level, and now we can start having a lower income, a middle income poverty line, which is a higher line of $3.2 per day.
Okay, I want to come to that $3.2 per day later on. And Dr. Virmani, a quick follow-up. What we are really talking about is, as I have understood from your paper, the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, and there are some numbers that would bear repetition. This is basically a 3.4 lakh crore spend for what is pegged as 1,003 lakh metric tons of food grains that have been given as an additional allocation beginning the pandemic month of March 2020 and has recently now been extended to the September month this year. And viewers, what it gives is 5 kilograms of food grains plus 1 kilogram of pulses, chana, and that has added and been provided to 800 million people across the country. And obviously, the Labharthis, the beneficiaries, have also welcomed this through perhaps some of the election results that we saw most recently, but I'm not discussing politics here. Dr. Virmani, if this scheme is till September, the second question I want to ask you is, once this is withdrawn, will poverty climb back again? Will we be in that kind of a situation?
Right. So that's a good question. So remember this, our study is, the full data was only available till the FY21. And we have just finished FY22, right? And the scheme has continued right through. And you must remember that we have recovered. We were down minus 6.6%. We said that our study showed that the food subsidy, the zero price food had countered that decline in poverty, but we've already had an 8.9% GDP growth in the last year. So we are now 2 to 3% above the 2019 GDP level. So by September, we should be on the kind of medium long-term growth path of 7.5. I mean, there are differing opinions. I am saying 7.5% plus minus 1%. Dr. Bhalla may have a different view. Others may have a different view. But by September, we should be back fully on the growth path. And so it will not be a problem. See, the only reason for extending it even from March to September is there are little pockets here and there, which have not fully recovered. So it's like a abundant caution to make sure that everybody, who fell during the pandemic is kind of back to normal.
Okay, Dr. Bhalla, I am coming back to you on the same point really. What would happen once this scheme is rolled back or curtailed? Because remember, it has doubled existing allocations of food grains, and I would dare say even ask this question, can such a scheme, which has proven to be extremely beneficial and popular at the same time, be even rolled back, sir?
Well, 2 quick points on that. First, as Arvind has explained, a large part of the reason was the pandemic and the need to secure the existence of the bottom third or half of the population,
okay,
and slightly more, if you will, in rural areas to the bottom 3/4. Now, one thing that has not been appreciated enough is the ingenuity and the foresight of the policymakers in deciding on 10 kilograms. You point that out in the paper, is 10 kilograms of wheat or rice per person per day. And historically, from 93 onwards, and this is based on NSS data, the consumption across the distribution of households has been 10 kgs. Okay, so it's one, we point out in the paper that this was a very astute and correct move by the government to supply all of their basic needs, including pulses, which got added later, which was also very. Now to your question, can it be removed? I think, look, once we move to a higher poverty line, there might be some discussion about continuing with this. And I am not so, what Arvind said is absolutely correct. Our economy will improve. Second, we have studied, Arvind has studied, Karan has studied, several social assistance programs around the world. And, this one is just very effective. So I see the point that you're trying to make, on the forecast that you're trying to make, what will happen afterwards. I think this will be debated in the policy circles. It should be debated. there is, some argument for continuing it and some arguments for not. But, it's proven to be a remarkably successful economic policy independent of the politics of it. How do you take care? And Arvind and I have jointly written on this whole thing of debate on universal basic income. Neither he nor I are fond of universal basic income. And we show that targeted policy like this, coupled with your income taxation ability or income eligibility, that, we need to rethink how, as India has progressed beyond extreme poverty, we need to rethink social policies. And the world over is this happening. It's not just India, it's the US, it's Europe, everywhere is thinking about, in this new world order, how best to maintain a certain minimum level of consumption for the bottom quarter or third of the population. So I'm leaving it there.
A quick follow-up point on the argument for and against, and I just want to underline that I believe that this program, which effectively means 60 kilos of food grain plus pulses if you take the family size to be 5 people, and that's pretty significant, because there are other government programs, including the money that's been provided to farmers, other kinds of cash assistance to Jan Dhan account holders. So if you sort of take that entire Garib Kalyan, not just the Anna part, even the cash part, it's significant. The argument against it, and this is a question to both of you, and this is based on some anecdotal evidence that I came across, is that this particular component of additional food grains in the most recent season, last 3-4 months, and currently as we speak, is leading to a labor shortage as far as the farm sector goes. Somebody who I know working in the state of Bihar and earning a livelihood in Delhi told me that it is difficult, and prices have actually gone up for farm labor because people are happy staying and getting this amount of food at home. How would you respond to that, that this is perhaps also leading to some distortions? Dr. Virmani, maybe you want to go first.
Yeah, I want to go first because of the various points Surjit has already made. So my view is very clear. I think this directed food delivery worked very well because we had a major shock. Like pandemic is a unprecedented shock. It's like once in a century. We've never in India had a -7% growth rate ever. So I would distinguish that yes, in this situation it worked very well, but I am all completely in favor of cash transfers, because I think they can be modulated and targeted. Now that we have an Aadhaar system, we have both proposed what we call a net income transfer system, which makes sure that the importance of the NIT is that it exactly meets what your problem is. It makes sure that the incentives are not distorted. So what happens is you get enough to eat, but you share marginally. It's a device. I don't want to go into the algebra of it, but it's designed exactly to make sure that the incentive to work is not distorted, but people get enough to eat and to live, a decent life. So I think in the longer term or the medium term, that is the solution. And I have developed that idea into what we call a welfare stack. Again, I don't want to go into the technical details, but this distinction between, big shocks and the usual fluctuations in income. You have droughts, you will have all kinds of, fluctuations in income. I think a cash transfer system is much better because it can be targeted and varied very well. And I think we've discussed before, and delivered on the cell phone. Everybody is going to have a cell phone within 5 years. You can deliver cash right on a cell phone, whether it's a migrant who's working in Delhi or Bombay, right, or he has to move to the villages.
Right. Dr. Bhalla, taking that point forward.
Just a little bit, this idea of labor shortage emanating from the supply of food is a bit stretched. Nowhere in the world is labor supply not a function, an increasing function of income. So, in other words, you want more. To think that people are just satisfied with, going back to what you started, elimination of extreme poverty, okay, they are satisfied with just crossing the poverty line. Ye nahi hota. Okay. So I think there are other explanations. Maybe the economy is doing rather well now, post the pandemic. So there is a labor shortage. Don't attribute it to this.
Okay.
Now,
I take you, sorry to interrupt you. I take your point, Dr. Bhalla, and I made it clear and I repeat it for the benefit of our viewers. It is anecdotal and just one person's comment, but it was very interesting because that person who is barely literate actually did these sums for me and said 60 kilos per month is a lot. But I won't press that point forward. I want a quick follow-up. If we replace this with income transfers...
Yes. Let me just come with the 60 kilos of the guy. Another real factor that has happened, you take, it's not including the pulses, it's 10. The family size today, average family size is somewhere 4.5.
Okay.
So just want to correct you.
You're absolutely right. Sir, if we replace this food program with income transfers of even the equivalent amount, we don't get into those calculations, will it not lead to an increase in inflation in those parts of the country where that cash transfer will go into people's hands? And I am asking this because of the overall inflationary concerns. I am not begrudging people getting cash in hand at all.
Okay, let me answer the inflation part, and Arvind is just as interested and can. When in doubt, raise inflation. India's handling of inflation, especially over the last few years, has been particularly good and better than most countries of the world. So, and everywhere there's an inflation problem. You tell me one part of the world that there's not an inflation problem. And, so I think that, but I want to come to something that you've not asked, but it's part of the demystifying thing that you said at the beginning. On the poverty line and on the extreme poverty, some commentators are saying, prominent commentators, that look, this is a flawed study because it doesn't take into account price differences in the rural and urban areas, which we know are large. You might have seen Dr. Pranab Sen, former chief statistician of India, making that point. So I would plead with all of them and you, if you read the paper, you don't even have to read it carefully. But this is one of the major points about any estimate of poverty. It has to be based on real terms. And anybody working on poverty in India realizes that there are price differences. And the poverty line is different for every state and different for every urban and rural area. So I just want to, demystify it for professional economists as well as for people watching this show.
Okay, that's a fair point. Dr. Virmani, I want to come to you to take this point about the overall economic situation a little forward. We've seen unprecedented levels of inflation, and I'm moving out of this study, but the broader context that we are in currently, including the fact that we are also now looking at our own interest rate architecture in India. How worrisome is the inflation situation in India at present in your own assessment?
So, because of the pandemic, we've had kind of unprecedented supply disruptions, and we've kind of been discussing this off and on. And to this, so we've had these two waves, right? We had the first wave, and if it had just been the first wave, we would have seen that fairly quick recovery of these supply side problems. But then we had a second wave, and it added, particularly in Russia, USA, and China. And then now we've had this Ukrainian disruption, which has raised oil prices supply high. So the point I'm making is that we are used to dealing with simple single shocks. Here we've had a series of three big shocks to the system. So it's becoming a little hard to distinguish. And I mean, I've been asserting that it's mainly a supply side problem, but it's becoming a little problematic, to go on saying that, because that underlying assumption is that, oh, it's all going to clean up. And by, let's say, in a year from now, we'll be back to normal inflation. So there is a little bit of worry there. But as far as India is concerned, my main concern is not inflation or current account deficit. But remember, this oil price has doubled. And as you well know, with importing 70% of oil, what this acts as is an income transfer. It's like a tax Indians pay to oil exporters. So our after-tax income, I mean, I'm just explaining it in very simple terms, the after-tax income that the country has goes down sharply because of the rise in oil prices. And this will delay the recovery of private consumption. That is my main worry right now, less the inflation and the current account and fiscal deficit effects, though obviously they are of some concern.
Dr. Bhalla, just this question to you, and from a much broader perspective from your perch, inflation suddenly coming after the pandemic, globally, supply disruptions, shortages, and crude oil also being thrown into the mix, a reversal of expectations from barely what we saw 6 months back. Is this going to last, or do you see globally a new adjustment happening to a higher price level?
Yeah, this is a very important question. And, and is being discussed here at the fund and everywhere else in rooms all across the world and houses all across the world. Look, what have we seen? And now I'm talking, and since you explicitly asked, from a global point of view. And this has been real universal, that for the last 25 years or so, we've had very low inflation. Now, there were certain factors that led to that low inflation. And I would say, and is well recognized, certain structural factors that led to that very low inflation. And the gap between developed economies and developing economies of average median inflation was down to about 1% so the advanced economies were had an inflation rate of 1.5%, and the median inflation rate in developing economies, the rest of the world, was 3.5%. So we've never seen this low gap since the early 60s. So point is, something fundamental happened. And so to argue that because of the very well-known, well-documented, well-publicized supply disruption, in addition to the oil crisis today, that this is somehow going to overturn what has happened over the last 25 years in the world.
Okay.
I find that bizarre. Now, that is not to say there isn't inflation today, but to think that the world faces, forget India, forget the US, forget it, the world faces a structural inflation problem is to defy evidence and facts and logic.
I thank you for your time with us today, and with that, it's a wrap on this show. If you've been, thank you very much for watching.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.